Okay, today we will start with the third chapter of the history, which is the nationalism in India. Now, we need to understand one thing, that this nationalism in India, when we are going through this particular chapter, we won't be discussing with events before the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi. We will be not discussing about the contribution of Swami Vivekananda, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, all these things we have came across when we were in class 8. Right now in class 10, we're going to discuss in depth on the role of Indian National Congress. We're going to discuss about non-cooperation movement. We're going to discuss about the civil disobedience movement. We're going to discuss about the participation of the different social groups in non-cooperation movement and civil disobedience movement. So the moment we use the word Gandhi, normally the Indian National Congress also comes into the scene. So basically this is the chapter where we will be discussing mainly related with Gandhi, the arrival of Gandhi to India, and how the whole scene of Indian nationalism or the whole scene of Indian independence took into final shape or took into final form. Now, so there are three objectives of this chapter. As I already mentioned, the first one will be talking about the non-cooperation movement. The second one will be talking about the civil disobedience movement, and the third will be talking about how the Congress developed this national movement through stages and how different social groups participate in the movement. When I'm talking about different social groups, I'm talking about different social groups which includes the people of the villages, the people in the people who are living in the forests, the the people who are living in the tribal areas, the Muslims, and the other marginalized sections of the society. So we're going to discuss about all these things. These are the basic objectives of this particular chapter. So as I've already mentioned, this chapter begins with Gandhi's arrival. So Gandhi, you need to understand one thing. Gandhi's arrival happened, all these things are taking place during the First World War. So what happens is this: the First World War was going on, and as India was already under the control of the British, India got dragged into the First World War. Now, when I'm using this word dragged, that means what? British forced Indian people from the villages and from the small towns to join the British army and fight for British in the First World War. So when I'm saying force, what I'm saying is this is called or known as forceful recruitment. So the British will come to your homes. The British will not listen to your logic or your requests. British will take the young men from your home, from your houses, and British will induct those young men into the British army, and you will be asked to participate in the First World War, even though India has nothing to do with the First World War. The length and the breadth of the country. Now, so firstly, we understood one reason. The first reason why the Indians were angry against the British, the first reason the Indians were angry against the British was forceful recruitment. British did not take anyone's request. British did not ask for any permission. Just went to villages and towns, took young men, inducted them into the army, and sent them to war. The second reason: during the war, during the ongoing of this First World War, what happened was this: the prices of the goods increased. As you know, whenever there is a war, the supply of the goods will decrease. If the supply of the goods decreases, what happens is this: the prices of the goods increases. And now for the people of India during that time, when there were no such jobs, no such industries, during that portion, during that time period, Indians, the common people of India, they were struggling to buy goods because they have to buy the essentials, and when they're buying the essentials, they're buying them at a higher price. Third reason why the Indians were angry with the British during that point of time was British, to fund their army, to fund their war, they increased the taxes in India. Now, just think about the plight of Indian people. Think about the plight of common people of India. They are not only buying essentials at higher prices, they are also paying higher taxes to the British government for participating in a war where Indians have got nothing to do with. So Like we are having right now this pandemic about corona. During that time also we had another epidemic which was influenza. Many people died due to this influenza epidemic, and British government neglected that particular scene. British government neglected the number of deaths, the increasing number of deaths. Uh, so all these causes piled up the resentment of Indians. All these causes made the Indians so angry, and the Indians were looking for one natural leader who can show them the way to protest and to fight against the British. And this is how Mahatma Gandhi comes into the scene. So if I move into the next slide says what? The effects of the First World War. As I've already discussed, whenever a war takes place, whether it's a world war or just a normal war, whenever war takes place, the economy of the country takes a hit. So look at the second point, especially those red colored words. The moment the war started, of course, you will be diverting your funds for the defense purpose, because you have to win the war, and to win a war you need to use more army men, you need to use more tanks, you need to use more guns, more artilleries, more gunpowder. All these items require money. So naturally these were all financed by war loans. And how to finance these war loans? Simple, you increase the tax. The more tax you increase, the more money you collect from the people. The more money you collect from the people, the more budget you have for the war. And the more budget you have for the war, the chances are there that you can win the war. So British did what? British increased the taxes. What the taxes British increased? They increased custom duties. They also increased the income tax. And for the first time, income tax was introduced during that time. So just imagine the Indians are paying higher custom duties, income tax got introduced, and the prices of the goods got doubled during the war. So all these led to what? Extreme hardships for the common people. And as I've already talked about forced recruitment, say look at the next point, the villages were called upon to supply the soldiers. Now as they were called to supply the soldiers, what happened was this. Now these common Indian men, these poor Indian men were forcefully recruited in the Indian army. The British Indian army. They were forcefully recruited the British Indian army to fight for a war, to represent the British crown, to fight for a war where the Indians have got nothing to do with it. And this caused nothing but a widespread anger. Crops failed. I told you British did not pay too much attention to it. The moment you take too many men and you put them into the army from the villages, of course the crops will be neglected. Growing crops will take a toll, and naturally the crops failed in many parts of India, which resulted in the shortage of the food. So there are so many things which happened. The first things which happened was this: the custom duties was introduced. The custom duties were raised. The income tax was introduced. The prices of the goods got doubled. Forceful recruitment happened. The crops failed. Like we are having corona, during that time influenza epidemic happened. Too many people died due to the outbreak of this influenza. What is influenza? It's a very common thing. It is due to the outbreak of virus. It normally attacks your lungs, throat, and the respiratory process. So due to this influenza epidemic happened during that time, and as per the census 1921, 12 to 13 million people died as a result of famine and as a result of epidemic. What epidemic? Influenza epidemic. Why famine? Because crops failed. So what is famine? Famine is like the people dying due to less crop production or due to less food availability. If you cannot grow crops, food is not available. If food is not available, you won't be able to have food. If you're not having food, you're meeting your demise. So 12 to 13 million people died as per the census 1921 report. Why they died? Because of this reason, the famine and due to the epidemic. Why the famine happened? Because the crops, they failed, which created the shortage of food. And what epidemic? The influenza epidemic. So these are the first effects of the World War. If the question comes to you, what are the effects of the First World War, or what were the impacts of the First World War on India? So the effects of the first effects which the World War had on India was the economic situation went down. And how the economic situation went down, you need to discuss on the custom duties, you need to discuss on the income tax, you need to discuss on the doubling of the price of goods, then you need to discuss on the forceful recruitment of the soldiers, and then you need to discuss about why the crops failed. And when the crops fail, there will be shortage of food. If there's a shortage of food, there will be famine. And at that time there was a, like corona we are having, that time we had influenza epidemic. So as per census 1921, 12 to 13 million people died. So this was really a sad part actually. Now from this particular slide, we're actually going to discuss about Gandhi's arrival. It comprises of two words actually. One is a Satya and another is Agraha. So it is basically Satya plus Agraha. So Satya means the truth and Agraha means insistence. Or you can write in another way, the whole word Satyagraha means need to search for the truth. I repeat, Satya means truth, Agraha means insistence. If I combine these two separate Sanskrit words, that is Satya and Agraha, they become Satyagraha. And meaning of the whole combined word of Satyagraha is need to search for the truth. So Satyagraha is basically based on passive resistance. Now what does it mean by passive resistance? It's a new technique. It's peaceful. Even if your opponent is doing something wrong, you know it, you accept the pain and the suffering by just opposing it in peaceful manner. Gandhi was a non-violent character, hence he never supported violence. So normally a Satyagraha, or the one who is practicing Satyagraha, is known as Satyagrahi. So a Satyagrahi cannot be aggressive. A Satyagrahi has to win the battle through non-violence. So this particular word Satyagraha was devised by whom? By Gandhi. So these particular slides talk about the 1915 year, which is very important as per CBSE. So in January 1915, Gandhi came back from South Africa, where he fought against racial discrimination or racism. When I'm talking about racial discrimination, that means Gandhi was actually fighting against racial discrimination because the whites were discriminating the brown people and the black people in South Africa. And Gandhi actually became quite a prominent face in the fight against racial discrimination by the British. So in January 1915, Gandhi came back to India. Gandhi followed the method which he was already using it in South Africa, which is Satyagraha. So he used this, the second point says he used a method of mass agitation. Mass means wide scale. Normally question comes in 1 mark, so what is Satyagraha? What is the idea behind Satyagraha? So Satyagraha teaches that if the cause was true and if it is against injustice, then the physical force is absolutely not required. This is very important to fight against the oppressor. So you're basically fighting against the opponent peacefully. You're not at all using any kind of weapon, or you're not resorting to violence. You are fighting against the oppressor peacefully, and you're also accepting the pain and suffering involved in opposing it. So basically the follower of Satyagraha idea is Satyagrahi. A Satyagrahi remains peaceful under all provocation. So the words Gandhi used, the highest violence can be met by the highest non-violence. Mark this, what Gandhi said. The highest violence can be met by the highest non-violence. So the whole thing, the Satyagraha, was developed by Gandhi. So the question comes from this particular slide. The two question comes, when did Gandhi come back to India for 1 marks, and the second question comes for like around 3 marks. Explain the idea behind Satyagraha. Now So Gandhi has already launched the concept of Satyagraha, right? If Gandhi has already launched this concept of Satyagraha, we need to understand Gandhi applied this concept of Satyagraha where areas in which year. We have this common misconception that Gandhi applied the Satyagraha concept from non-cooperation movement. It is completely wrong, and in class 10 we will be learning that Gandhi applied the Satyagraha concept in three different areas. The first the first state which Gandhi visited was Bihar, and then the other two areas which Gandhi visited was his own state, which is Gujarat. So in Bihar, there's a place called Champaran. In 1916, so in 1915, Gandhi came back from South Africa. The next year, 1916, Gandhi did not take too much break, or Gandhi did not waste his time. Just in the following year, 1916, Gandhi traveled to Champaran in Bihar to inspire the farmers to struggle against the oppressive plantation system. The farmers were actually protesting against all these things. But the peasants and the farmers, they wanted more freedom to cultivate crops of their own choice, and they never wanted to plant crops which are categorized under plantation system. Now the crops which are categorized under plantation system are like tea, coffee, rubber, bananas, and especially the indigo. So the peasants who were living in Champaran, they wanted more freedom to grow crops as per their choice, because they know what is the soil fertility and what are the conditions best to grow crops. Yet they were forced to grow crops, plantation crops, especially because plantation crops, if you sell the plantation crops, it fetches you more money. So British wanted wanted those small peasants and farmers to grow plantation crops. So Gandhi actually represented the anger, the problems of the peasants and the farmers of the Champaran Bihar in which year? 1916. So Gandhi organized Satyagraha movements, first in year of 1916, where Bihar. Second, I told you Gandhi went to Gujarat, his own state. So the next year, which is 1917, Gandhi organized Satyagraha to support the farmers of Kheda district of Gujarat. What happened here? Here the farmers were not having problem with the plantation system and everything. The farmers were actually affected by crop failure and again plague epidemic. So most farmers, if they cannot grow crops, so how will they pay tax? So naturally they could not pay the revenue, and Gandhi came to their help, and Gandhi pleaded to the officials to relax the revenue collection so that little amount of money can be collected, or little amount of tax can be collected from the farmers. Why little amount of money? Why not the usual amount of tax? Because the farmers have already faced crop failure. So this thing happened where? Don't forget, the Kheda district of Gujarat. This happened in which year? 1917. So Gandhi started and applied the Satyagraha concept. First, Gandhi applied the Satyagraha concept in which year? 1916, where? Champaran, Bihar. Next, Gandhi applied this concept in the following year, 1917, where? Kheda district of Gujarat. The causes are different. You must not get confused and do not jumble up the causes. And in the next following year, in 1918, Gandhi went to Ahmedabad to organize a Satyagraha movement amongst the cotton mill workers, or the textile mill workers. So these are the areas, because the cotton mill workers, if you ask me why, because the cotton mill workers, they wanted better working conditions, and so they were protesting against, they were actually, as they wanted better working conditions, they were protesting against the authorities, and Gandhi joined them. And Gandhi, as usual, applied Satyagraha in this particular movement. And so Gandhi actually successfully conducted movements on the basis of Satyagraha in three separate areas, in 3 years, in 3 consecutive years, I should say. 1916 in Bihar, Champaran; 1917 Kheda of Gujarat; 1918 Ahmedabad. And Gandhi successfully, mark my word, successfully launched his Satyagraha movements in these 3 areas. So these initiatives actually marked Gandhi. These three initiatives in these 3 years marked Gandhi out as a nationalist with a deep sympathy for the poor. Because previously what happens was Congress never addressed the problem of the poor people. Now we have one leader who's becoming more and more prominent over the years. He is now paying attention to the problems of the poor and who has a deep sympathy for the poor. So, and which is good, and this is how Gandhi is connecting with the poor people. Now we come to the main portion of this chapter. Actually, the main portion of the chapter starts from this year 1919. Now this particular thing, 1919, is like related with many events, but we will be focusing only one event, which is the Rowlett Act. If the authorities want, they can arrest you, they can detain the political prisoners without trial for 2 years. So like, if I have to arrest you, I first have to file a case in the court, and if the court says that yes, you can be arrested for XYZ number of years, and then only I can put you behind the bars. If the court says no, he can't be arrested, he has no case, the case which has been produced by the local police is not enough for this person to be put behind the bars, then that person will be released. Now the British passed this particular law in the Imperial Legislative Council, and this particular law was protested by the Indians. Yet the British did not pay enough attention to the Indians, and British passed this particular law despite the opposition of the Indians. This particular law, when it was passed in the Imperial Legislative Council, the Imperial Legislative Council is a central legislative council which is present in Delhi. So when this law was passed, as the law was passed, it became the bill was passed, it became an act, and this act gave the government detain any kind of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. So I can come and I can detain you, I can arrest you for 2 years without a trial. So you cannot file a case against me in the court. So there is no possibility. So if I have anger against you, if I have problem with you, I'll straight away come to your home, I'll arrest you, and I'll put you or I'll detain you for 2 years. You cannot protest against me, you cannot file a case against me in the court. Just think the level of injustice. This Rowlett Act was passed despite the opposition of the Indians. There was so much protest throughout the country, and Gandhi decided to launch a nationwide Satyagraha movement. Try to understand one thing. The Satyagraha movement, which was launched by Gandhi 1916, 1917, 1918, these three movements which was launched, all these things happened in two separate states. So one is Bihar and another is Gujarat. It was not a nationwide movement. You need to differentiate this, and this time it is happening throughout the country. So it's a nationwide movement. So how did Gandhi go ahead with this Satyagraha? What are the steps did Gandhi take? Gandhi started the whole Hartal on 6th April. The second point says rallies were organized in cities, workers went on strike in railway workshops, and shops were closed down. Mark three things. Rallies were organized in cities, workers went on strike, shops were closed down. Is it written that the people went and burnt the railway shops? The railway workshops? Is it written that the people went and burnt the police stations? Is it written that the people went and murdered the few British officers? No, it is not written. Why it is not written? Because Gandhi has started the whole thing called Satyagraha, and all the other Satyagrahis are working with Gandhi on the idea of Satyagraha, and hence everything is happening in a peaceful way. Rallies were organized, workers went on strike, shops were closed down. So naturally, British, when they got this kind of news, they will not sit idle, right? So they took the steps to suppress the Hartal, because the British felt, or they feared, that the Indians might disrupt the lines of the communication, such as railways and the telegraphy. They might pull out the railway tracks. They might pull down the telegraph lines and all those things in anger. So British feared that there might be disrupt of the lines of communication. So British even decided to pick the local leaders from Amritsar, and Gandhi was not allowed to enter Delhi, because they identified that Gandhi was actually the leader who has organized everything, and people are doing as per the advice or orders on Gandhi. So Gandhi was not allowed to enter Delhi. So naturally what happened was this: on 10th April, there was a peaceful procession which was taking place in Amritsar. Suddenly police fired on that peaceful procession, and the moment this peaceful procession, the firing was done on this peaceful procession, it provoked a widespread attacks on the banks, post offices and railway stations. Now, the moment this police started firing or fired on 10th April on this peaceful procession which was taking place in Amritsar, people could not contain their anger. As people could not contain their anger, so people attacked the banks, people attacked the post offices, people attacked the railway stations. This time the idea of Satyagraha is not working because of the anger of the people. Attack the banks, post office and railway stations. Why banks? Why post office? Why railway stations? Because these are the symbols of the British. So like if you get angry, what the first thing what will you do in your home? You will try to break something which your dad has given or which your mom has given. Why? Because if you're angry against dad, if you're angry against your mom, you will try to damage things which mom has given to you. You will try to damage things which your dad has given to you. So naturally the banks, post office, railway stations, they were made by the British in India. So these are British institutions right now. They are present in within the Indian territory, but these are actually made by the British. So the people were against the British. So what they did was this: they attacked the symbols of the British out of anger. Hence they attacked the banks, hence they attacked the post office, hence they attacked the railway stations. The law and order goes out of your hand. Martial law got introduced. What is martial law? Martial law is a special type of law where the military takes over in times of emergency. So when normal law and order situation is out of your hand, when normal law and order situation cannot be contained by local police authorities, military gets involved. Martial law was introduced and General Dyer took command of the whole area. This particular slide is a very important slide because it talks about the Rowlett Act. So Rowlett Act was passed in 1919, where in Imperial Legislative Council, despite the opposition of the Indians, you must understand, this Rowlett Act gave the government power to suppress the political activities. So how will you suppress the political activities? By detaining political prisoners without any trial for 2 years. So you're not involving the court system. You cannot challenge the arrest. You cannot challenge the detention. You cannot move to court. Gandhi launched Satyagraha against Rowlett Act. The first step Gandhi did was Gandhi started the Hartal on 6th April. Second, rallies were organized in the cities. Third, workers went on strike in the railway workshops. Fourth, the shops were closed down. When British got this news, British took steps to suppress this particular Hartal started by Gandhi. Why? Because British feared that the Indians might disrupt the lines of communication such as railways and telegraph. And British ultimately decided to arrest few leaders from Amritsar, and Gandhi was not allowed to enter Delhi. The mistake that British did was the local police operating under British authorities, they fired on a peaceful procession in Amritsar, and the whole situation went out of control, went out of the police system operating under British. As people got angry, people started attacking the banks, the symbols of British, post offices and railway stations. Ordinary law was suspended, and during the suspension of ordinary law, martial law was introduced. 1919, not just Rowlett Act happened. Another infamous incident happened, which was Jallianwala Bagh. So on 13th April, actually, you need to understand, if I go back to the previous slide, it was on 10th April, police fired on a peaceful procession in Amritsar and General Dyer took command. Martial law was introduced and General Dyer took command. So after 3 days, so on 13th April, another infamous incident actually happened. So when I'm saying the infamous incident happened, I'm not using the word famous. Try to understand one thing. I'm using the word infamous. Infamous means a particular incident, people recall this particular incident because of its notoriety. People do not recall this incident out of joy. So on 13th April, infamous incident took place, and that incident was none other than Jallianwala Bagh. So what happened was, basically, Bagh means garden. So large people gathered in a garden. Why? Because it was a Baisakhi fair. As you can make it out, the date is the 13th April. It's a Baisakhi date. People wanted to celebrate the new year as per the Indian calendar. So they wanted to attend a local fair, a local mela. So people came to attend the Baisakhi fair, and if you ask why the people came to attend the Baisakhi fair when there was already martial law which was imposed in Amritsar, the thing is there are many people who came from villages. They're unaware of this particular incident of this, that the martial law has been imposed and there is no more ordinary laws present, as during that time there were hardly any presence of newspapers or internet or any kind of telecommunications where people could come to know, especially the villagers would come to know that we are not supposed to gather in a. So few people came to attend Baisakhi fair and a few people came to Jallianwala Bagh in protest of British government's suppressive activities like firing on peaceful procession, passing of Rowlett Act and all those things. So you have a crowd where in Jallianwala Bagh there came, the moment he got this particular information that has been a large gathering in this particular area, he came with a lot of police. He entered the area. You must understand there was only one exit. In this whole garden, there was only one exit. General Dyer wanted to teach the lesson. What lesson? Because General Dyer took it personally that how come these people are flouting this martial law. And they arrived at Jallianwala Bagh. General Dyer arrived at Jallianwala Bagh with 90 troops and ordered to open the fire on the gathering without any warning. Just imagine there was only one exit. People were not informed. It's not that General Dyer came with military force and dispersed the crowd. He did not do all those things. He just came and opened the fire until the last bullet gets exhausted. Until the last bullet, the firing went on. And what happened was this: it was a massacre. As it was only one exit, people tried to run, people tried to squeeze through that one exit to get out of that particular garden. People could not. 369 protesters were killed and over 1000 people were injured. I repeat these numericals: 369 protesters were killed and over 1000 people were wounded. The bullet marks can still be seen on the walls of this Jallianwala Bagh, which is there right now. It has been converted into national memorial. If you want to go, you can visit there. So just imagine the brutality what British did right now. Indians got furious with this British brutality. They took to the streets to protest. This time, Gandhi's Satyagraha concept could not take place. Again, there were strikes, there were clashes with police, and people again attacked the government buildings. When I'm saying the people attacked the government buildings, people attacked the banks, people attacked the post offices, people attacked the railway stations. And how did the British government respond? This is very important, this particular Jallianwala Bagh slide. How the British government responded? The British government responded with brutal methods. What are the brutal methods they used? Satyagrahis, look at this particular word. The Satyagrahis were forced to rub their noses on the ground, crawl on the streets, and salute to the British Sahibs. So they were actually forced to rub their noses on the ground, means they were treated like dogs, like how dogs sniff on ground. The Satyagrahis were forced to rub their noses on the ground, crawl on the streets like dogs, and salute to British Sahibs, salute to British officers, make them feel inferior to the British. So they were forced to salute to the British Sahibs. They were bombed. Gandhi had to call off the movement by seeing such spread of violence. Why such spread of violence? Because Gandhi himself is non-violent. He understood the whole scene, the whole movement went out of hand. So Gandhi had to immediately call off the movement because of the growing nature of violence. So we're going to stop with our explanations till this 7th slide. I hope you people understood what we went through actually. So we basically started this chapter with 3 objectives. The non-cooperation movement we'll be discussing the civil disobedience, and we'll be discussing about the Congress and the participation of several groups. We had not reached to the non-cooperation movement. We will be reaching to the non-cooperation movement from the subsequent slides. But till that, we have discussed about few things. We have discussed about effects of the First World War. What were the effects uh, when the World War happened? How the Indian people reacted? Why the Indian people reacted? What were the effects on the Indian people? What were the effects of the economy of India? And then we learned about the next slide. We learned about Satyagraha concept. The next we understood the Satyagraha movements. Gandhi came back in 1915. Gandhi did not sit idle in 1916, 1917, 1918. Gandhi launched Satyagraha movements, individual Satyagraha movements in two states, Bihar and Gujarat. First one in Bihar and the latter two events, 1917 and 1918 in Gujarat. And then we had Rowlett Act just 1 year later. Just try to understand one thing. The sequence of the years, there's nothing to get confused. 1915, Gandhi came back. 1916, Gandhi launched a Satyagraha movement in Champaran. 1917, Gandhi launched Satyagraha movement in Kheda district. 1918, Gandhi launched a Satyagraha movement in Ahmedabad. 1919, Rowlett Act was passed. And in the same year, 1919, 10th April, peaceful procession, firing was done on the peaceful procession, and hence martial law was imposed. General Dyer was in charge, and after 3 days, that is on the 13th April, Jallianwala Bagh, the infamous incident took place. Please do not write famous. It is infamous incident. People attacked the government buildings. We understood the sentiment behind attacking the government buildings because they represent British government. These government buildings are the symbols of the British government. Normally you will see whenever there is a strike, the opposition party in India, they burn down the government buses. They burn down, like in the Citizenship Amendment Act, what you saw, the people were burning down the railway trains, they were vandalizing the railway stations, police stations, they're burning down the public vehicles, the government buses. Why? Because they represent the government. These are symbols of the government. So similarly, the people of India during that time attacked these government buildings because they symbolize British government. They're the symbols of British government. And we also learned, this is very important, how the British government responded. So from this, the last slide, this seventh slide, the two questions generally come. The first question pertains to Jallianwala Bagh, and the next question which comes is how the British government responded. So we need to understand one thing, that we should not mix up with this British government, how the British government responded to Jallianwala Bagh, and with the previous slide, how the British government responded to the Hartal launched by Gandhi. This Hartal was launched by Gandhi against Rowlett Act. So how British government suppressed this Hartal, and the next slide, how British government actually tried to suppress the people, the angry people protesting the incident of Jallianwala Bagh. We should not be getting confused with these two particular British suppression. These two are completely different. I believe in the next class we'll be discussing from the 8th slide, and then